Grandma, if Mom and Dad decided not to come back, would you still let me live here? Those were the words my 8-year-old grandson asked me less than 24 hours after his parents left for what they called a dream luxury cruise. And even now, I remember the way my heart seemed to stop for a second when I heard them. At the time, I told myself he was only nervous about being away from his parents. Children say strange things when routines change. At least, that was what I wanted to believe. My name is Margaret Dawson. I am 68 years old, a widow, and until that week, I thought I understood my family. My son Ethan and his wife Vanessa arrived at my house early on a bright Saturday morning. Their SUV was packed with luggage. Expensive luggage. The kind with matching tags and polished handles that looked like they belonged in a travel magazine. Vanessa stepped out first, sunglasses on despite the mild Ohio sunshine. Ethan followed, carrying 2 large suitcases toward the driveway, while Noah climbed slowly from the back seat. Unlike his parents, he didn't look excited. He looked tired, nervous, quiet. "Mom, thanks again for helping us out," Ethan said as he set down a suitcase and wrapped me in a quick hug. "It's only 10 days. You know I'm always happy to spend time with Noah," I replied. And I meant it. Noah was the brightest part of my life. Since my husband passed away 5 years earlier, my grandson had a way of bringing laughter back into rooms that had grown too quiet. Vanessa checked her watch. "We should get going," she said. "Traffic to the airport can be unpredictable." Then she knelt in front of Noah. At first, I thought she was simply saying goodbye, but something about her expression caught my attention. Her smile looked forced, tense. "Remember what we talked about," she told him softly. Noah immediately lowered his eyes. "Okay," he whispered. "Good boy," she said. Then she stood up and brushed invisible dust from her jacket. The exchange lasted only a few seconds, but it left an uncomfortable feeling in my stomach. Before I could ask what she meant, Ethan was already loading the last suitcase into the vehicle. Vanessa hugged Noah quickly. Ethan ruffled his son's hair. Within moments, they were climbing into the SUV. Noah stood beside me on the front porch while we watched them pull away. Most children would have waved excitedly. Noah didn't. He simply stared until the vehicle disappeared around the corner. "You okay, sweetheart?" I asked. He forced a smile. "Yeah." But the answer came too quickly. Inside the house, I tried to make the day fun. We baked chocolate chip cookies. We watched a baseball game on television. We ordered pizza from Noah's favorite place downtown. Little by little, he seemed to relax. He laughed when I accidentally dropped flour on the kitchen floor. He talked about school and his friends. For a while, I convinced myself that everything was normal. Yet every now and then I would catch him looking toward the front window as though he expected someone to arrive. Later that evening, after dinner, I noticed him sitting alone at the dining room table. His coloring book lay open in front of him, but he wasn't coloring. He was just staring at the page. "Penny for your thoughts?" I asked. He jumped slightly. "Nothing." Another answer that came too quickly. Children often reveal their worries without realizing it. Noah was doing the opposite. He seemed determined to keep something inside. That night, I made up the guest room for him. The room had belonged to Ethan when he was a boy. The same blue walls, the same bookshelf, the same framed photograph of Ethan holding his first Little League trophy. Noah smiled when he saw it. "Dad looks funny." "He was about your age," I said. "He thought that trophy made him famous." Noah laughed. A real laugh this time. I kissed the top of his head and turned off the light. "Good night, sweetheart." "Good night, Grandma." Around midnight, I woke up thirsty and headed toward the kitchen for a glass of water. As I passed the guest room, I noticed a thin line of light beneath the door. I knocked gently. "Noah." There was no answer. I opened the door a few inches. He was sitting upright in bed, wide awake. His small shoulders were tense. "Honey, what's wrong?" I asked. "Can't sleep." I walked inside and sat beside him. "Want to talk about it?" He hesitated. For a moment, I thought he might finally tell me what was bothering him. Instead, he shook his head. "No." Then his hand moved instinctively beneath the pillow. It was a tiny movement, but I noticed it. Something was hidden there. Something he wanted to protect. I pretended not to see. "Try to get some rest," I said gently. He nodded. As I stood to leave, he looked up at me with eyes that suddenly seemed far older than 8 years old. "Grandma." "Yes." He swallowed hard. "If parents leave forever, does that mean they don't love you anymore?" I froze. The room felt strangely still. Outside, the summer wind rattled the leaves against the window. I forced myself to stay calm. "Why would you ask that?" Noah looked down at the blanket. Just wondering. But I knew better. Children don't ask questions like that for no reason. I sat there for several seconds, staring at my grandson and feeling a growing sense of unease settle deep inside my chest. Something had happened before Ethan and Vanessa boarded that cruise ship. Something they hadn't told me. And for the first time since they left that morning, I found myself wondering whether their vacation was really what it seemed. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, something I had done almost every day since my husband passed away. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant chirping of birds outside the kitchen window. I brewed a pot of coffee and stood by the sink watching the first light spread across my backyard. Usually, mornings brought me peace. That morning brought questions. Noah came downstairs nearly an hour later. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes. For a boy his age, he looked exhausted. I made pancakes shaped like baseballs, something he always loved, and for a little while he seemed more like himself. He smiled. He even asked for extra syrup. But every few minutes his gaze drifted toward the counter where my cell phone sat charging. It was subtle, but I noticed. After breakfast, we spent the morning in the backyard. Noah rode his bicycle up and down the driveway while I trimmed flowers along the fence. Around 11 o'clock, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Before I could answer, Noah stopped pedaling. His entire body seemed to tense. He stared at the screen from 20 feet away. When the ringing stopped, he slowly relaxed. I told myself it was probably a coincidence. Children notice things adults overlook. Maybe he simply disliked unexpected calls. Still, the reaction stayed with me. Later that afternoon, rain clouds rolled across the sky. We moved indoors and started a puzzle on the dining room table. Noah was fitting together pieces of a lighthouse when he suddenly asked, "Grandma, have you ever had to move away from somewhere you loved?" The question caught me off guard. "Yes," I answered carefully. "When your grandfather and I bought our first house, I had to leave the town where I grew up." Noah lowered his eyes. "Was it hard?" "At first." I smiled gently. "But home is not always a building. Sometimes it is the people who care about you." He nodded, though his expression remained troubled. Then he changed the subject so quickly it felt rehearsed. That evening, after dinner, I noticed something unusual. Noah carried his backpack everywhere. To the living room. To the kitchen. Even when he went upstairs to brush his teeth. Most children tossed their backpacks aside the moment school ended for summer. Noah treated his like a treasure chest. Or a secret. When he finally fell asleep that night, I sat alone in the living room with a book open on my lap. I had not turned a page in nearly 30 minutes. My thoughts kept returning to the strange questions, the nervous glances, the hidden item beneath his pillow. Around 10 o'clock, I decided to check on him. His bedroom door was slightly open. Moonlight spilled across the floor. Noah was asleep, curled beneath the blanket. For a moment, I simply stood there looking at him. He seemed so small, so vulnerable. Then I noticed something sticking out of the side pocket of his backpack. A folded corner of white paper. I immediately looked away. Whatever it was, it belonged to him. I had no intention of invading his privacy. But as I turned toward the door, I saw something else. The backpack zipper was partially open. Inside sat a large manila envelope. My stomach tightened. The envelope looked official. Not something an 8-year-old would normally carry around. I quietly left the room and closed the door behind me. Sleep did not come easily that night. The next morning, Noah seemed even more distracted. While we were making sandwiches for lunch, he accidentally dropped a glass of orange juice. The glass did not break, but the spill startled him so badly that he nearly burst into tears. I wrapped my arms around his shoulders. "Hey, it is okay. It was just an accident." He nodded, embarrassed. "Sorry. You never have to apologize for being human." He smiled weakly. Then he asked something that made the uneasy feeling inside me grow even stronger. "Grandma, if someone promised not to leave you, but then they did anyway, would that make them a liar?" I stared at him. "Did somebody make you a promise, sweetheart?" He hesitated. For a second, I thought he might finally tell me everything. Instead, he looked down at the kitchen floor. Not really. That afternoon, while Noah watched cartoons in the family room, the doorbell rang. I opened the front door expecting a delivery driver. Instead, I found a middle-aged woman standing on the porch holding a clipboard. She smiled politely. "Good afternoon. I am sorry to bother you. I am looking for Ethan Dawson." My heartbeat quickened slightly. "He is out of town." Her smile faded almost imperceptibly. "I see." She glanced at her paperwork. Do you know when he will return? About a week from now. She nodded and handed me a business card. Please ask him to contact our office as soon as possible. Before I could ask any questions, she thanked me and walked back to her car. I looked down at the card after she left. There was no company logo I recognized. Only a name, a phone number, and the words Financial Recovery Services printed beneath them. As I stood there holding the card, a cold feeling settled into my chest. For the first time, I began to suspect that whatever Ethan and Vanessa had left behind was much bigger than I had imagined. After the woman left, I placed the business card on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a long time. Financial Recovery Services. The name sounded official enough to make me uncomfortable, but vague enough to tell me almost nothing. I considered calling the number immediately. Then I stopped myself. If there was a misunderstanding, I did not want to create unnecessary problems while Ethan and Vanessa were away. Still, the card remained in my thoughts for the rest of the afternoon. Noah noticed it almost immediately. Children often pretend not to pay attention to adult conversations, but they hear more than we realize. As he walked past the counter to grab a glass of water, his eyes landed on the card. He froze for half a second. Then he looked away. That tiny reaction told me more than any explanation could have. He recognized something about it. During dinner, I tried to keep things light. We ordered hamburgers from a local diner and watched an old family movie afterward. Noah laughed at some of the funny scenes, but his laughter always seemed to fade too quickly. It was as if he was carrying a weight far too heavy for someone his age. Later that evening, while he brushed his teeth upstairs, I began clearing the table. That was when I noticed something sticking out from beneath one of the dining room chairs. It was a folded piece of paper. At first, I assumed it was part of the puzzle instructions we had used earlier in the week. But when I picked it up, I realized it was a drawing. Noah had drawn a picture using colored pencils. On one side stood a small boy. On the other side stood an older woman with gray hair. I recognized myself immediately. Above us, he had drawn a house with a large red roof. Far away, near the edge of the page, was a cruise ship floating on blue water. What caught my attention was the caption he had carefully written beneath it in uneven handwriting. It said, "Home is where people stay." I sat down slowly. My chest tightened. Children express fears through drawings in ways they often cannot through conversation. I folded the paper carefully and placed it back where I found it. When Noah came downstairs, I did not mention it. Instead, I made us both hot chocolate, and we sat quietly in the living room. Around 9 o'clock, my cell phone rang again. Another unfamiliar number. Before I could answer, the call ended. Seconds later, a voicemail notification appeared. I listened to it immediately. The message was brief. A professional voice requested that Ethan Dawson contact their office regarding an urgent financial matter. No details. No explanation. Just urgency. I deleted nothing. I saved the message. The next morning, Noah seemed unusually determined to stay close to me. He followed me from room to room while I handled ordinary chores. When I watered the flowers, he came outside. When I folded laundry, he sat on the edge of the couch nearby. Even when I checked the mailbox, he insisted on coming along. Inside the mailbox were advertisements, a grocery flyer, and one large envelope addressed to Ethan. The return address belonged to a law office in Columbus. Before I could set it aside, Noah spotted it. The color drained from his face. "Grandma," he said quietly, "do not open that." I looked at him carefully. "Why would you think I was going to?" He swallowed. "I do not know." His answer came too quickly. That afternoon, rain began falling steadily outside. Noah retreated to the guest room while I sat at the kitchen table sorting old photographs. The house felt unusually silent. Eventually, I decided to bring him a snack. As I approached the room, I heard his voice. He was speaking softly. At first, I assumed he was playing a game or watching videos. Then I realized he was talking to someone on the phone. I stopped. "No," he whispered. "I do not want to leave Grandma's house." Silence followed. Then his voice became even quieter. "Mom said everything would be okay, but she says that every time." My heart skipped. I stepped away before he could notice me listening. A few minutes later, Noah emerged from the room holding his backpack. His eyes looked red, not from tears exactly, but from the effort of holding them back. He sat beside me at the kitchen table without speaking. Then, after several minutes of silence, he slowly unzipped the backpack. From inside, he removed the large manila envelope I had noticed before. He placed it on the table between us. His small hands trembled slightly. Grandma, he said, staring down at the envelope. There is something I think you need to see. For several seconds, I simply stared at the envelope sitting between us. The rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows, filling the silence that neither of us seemed ready to break. Noah kept his eyes fixed on the table. He looked frightened, but there was also something else in his expression. Relief. The kind of relief that comes when someone finally stops carrying a secret alone. I placed my hand gently over his. Sweetheart, are you sure? He nodded. Mom told me not to show anybody. Dad said it was just grown-up stuff. But I do not think they were telling the truth. His voice trembled on the last word. Carefully, I opened the envelope. Inside were several documents folded neatly together. The first page appeared to be a bank statement. I glanced down and immediately felt my stomach tighten. The account balance was far lower than I expected. Much lower. There were pages of withdrawals, transfers, and overdue notices attached behind it. I turned to the next document. It was a mortgage statement. Past due. Several months past due. I blinked and read it again, convinced I must have misunderstood. Ethan had always presented himself as financially secure. He drove a new vehicle. He and Vanessa traveled frequently. Their social media accounts were filled with smiling photographs from restaurants, resorts, and weekend getaways. Yet the numbers on the page told a completely different story. I continued reading. Credit card balances, late payment notices, letters from lenders. Each document painted the same picture. Debt. More debt than I could easily comprehend. Noah watched my face carefully. Is it bad? He asked quietly. I forced myself to stay calm. I am not completely sure yet. That was only partly true. I already knew enough to understand that something was very wrong. Then I reached the final document. Unlike the others, it was not from a bank or a lender. It was a typed letter. The first line made my heart skip. It was addressed directly to Noah. My hands suddenly felt cold. I read slowly. The letter explained that if certain financial matters could not be resolved, significant changes might happen in the family's living situation. It mentioned moving. It mentioned temporary arrangements. It mentioned uncertainty. What it never mentioned was stability. What it never offered was reassurance. Halfway through the letter, I stopped reading and looked up. Noah was staring at me with wide eyes. I found it in Dad's desk, he said. They were fighting about it one night. Mom was crying. Dad kept saying everything would work out. He swallowed hard. But then they booked the cruise. I set the papers down carefully. The contradiction hit me immediately. If their financial situation was truly this serious, why spend money on an expensive vacation? The question sat heavily in my mind. Did your parents know you found these? I asked. Noah shook his head. No. I hid them. Why? His answer came instantly. Because nobody tells me the truth. The words broke my heart. 8 years old. Too young to worry about mortgages, debt, or legal notices. Too young to feel responsible for protecting documents. Too young to believe the adults around him were hiding things. Yet here he was, carrying fears that should never have belonged to him. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Listen to me carefully. Whatever is happening, you are safe here. He nodded, but his eyes filled with uncertainty. Promise. I promise. For the first time since Ethan and Vanessa left, some of the tension left his shoulders. That evening, after Noah went upstairs, I spread the documents across the dining room table and examined them again. This time I noticed details I had missed before. Dates, account numbers, references to additional loans. The problem was not recent. It had been building for years. Piece by piece, month by month. The realization disturbed me more than anything else. This was not a sudden emergency. This was a slow collapse hidden behind carefully staged appearances. Around 10 o'clock, I received another voicemail from an unfamiliar number. This one was different. The caller identified himself as an attorney attempting to reach Ethan Dawson regarding urgent financial obligations. He requested an immediate return call. I listened to the message twice, then a third time. When it ended, I sat quietly in the darkness of the dining room. The rain had stopped. The house felt still. Upstairs, Noah slept peacefully for what seemed like the first time since arriving. Downstairs, surrounded by papers my son never intended me to see, I began to understand something that filled me with dread. Ethan and Vanessa had not simply left for a vacation. They had left in the middle of a crisis. And the more I looked at the evidence spread across my table, the more I feared that the crisis was far from over. The following morning, I drove Noah to a small park a few miles from my house. I hoped the fresh air would help both of us. He spent nearly an hour on the swings while I sat on a nearby bench watching him. Children are resilient in ways adults often forget. Give them a moment of safety, and they will find reasons to smile even when they are carrying worries they cannot explain. For the first time in days, Noah looked genuinely happy. Yet every now and then, I caught him glancing toward me, as if checking to make sure I was still there. When we returned home that afternoon, I found another envelope waiting in the mailbox. This one was addressed to Vanessa. The return address belonged to a real estate office. My pulse quickened immediately. I carried the envelope inside and placed it beside the stack of documents already covering part of my dining room table. I had no intention of opening mail that did not belong to me, but the growing pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Real estate offices, attorneys, financial recovery companies. None of it matched the image Ethan and Vanessa had spent years presenting to the world. That evening, Noah helped me make spaghetti for dinner. As we worked in the kitchen, he seemed unusually talkative. Sometimes children reveal important truths when they feel comfortable. They do not realize which details matter. They simply talk. "A lot of people came to our house this year," he said while sprinkling cheese onto his plate. "What do you mean?" I asked casually. "People I did not know." He shrugged. "They walked through all the rooms." I kept my voice calm. "Did your parents tell you why?" "Dad said they were visitors." He paused. "But visitors usually stay and talk. These people just looked at everything." I set down my fork. "How many times did that happen?" Noah thought for a moment. "A lot." Then he added something that made my stomach tighten. "Mom made me clean my room every single time." After dinner, I found myself replaying the conversation again and again. Unknown people touring the house. A real estate office sending mail. Financial trouble hidden behind expensive vacations and carefully curated photographs. The pieces were beginning to fit together, though I still did not have the full picture. The next day, I received an unexpected answer from a completely different source. My next-door neighbor, Linda, stopped by carrying a basket of blueberry muffins she had baked that morning. She and I had been friends for more than 20 years. We sat together on the back patio while Noah played catch with himself in the yard. Eventually, the conversation turned toward Ethan and Vanessa. "I was surprised they left town," Linda said, "especially with everything going on." I looked at her carefully. "What do you mean?" She seemed surprised by the question. "You did not know?" My heart sank. "Know what?" Linda hesitated. "Margaret, I assumed Ethan told you." She glanced toward Noah before lowering her voice. "A moving company was at their house several times over the last few months." I stared at her. "A moving company?" "Yes." She nodded. "Not a full move. More like storage pickups. Furniture. Boxes. Personal items." The world suddenly felt very still. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely." Linda looked concerned now. "I thought they were relocating." After she left, I sat alone on the patio for a long time. A moving company. Storage pickups. Multiple visits. Those were not the actions of people planning for a normal future. Those were the actions of people preparing for major change. That night, after Noah had gone to bed, I returned to the documents spread across my dining room table. This time I noticed a reference I had overlooked before. Buried within one of the statements was the name of a storage facility located 30 miles away. My eyes lingered on the address. Slowly, a troubling possibility began to form. What if Ethan and Vanessa had already started moving pieces of their lives elsewhere? What if the cruise was not simply a vacation at all? What if it was a delay? A distraction? A way to postpone facing something they could no longer control? I looked upstairs toward the room where my grandson slept peacefully beneath my roof. Then I looked back down at the evidence scattered across the table. For days I had been trying to understand why an 8-year-old child seemed so frightened of being left behind. Now, for the first time, I was beginning to fear that his worries had not come from imagination at all. The next morning began with an uneasy feeling I could not shake. I stood in my kitchen holding a cup of coffee while looking out at the backyard. Noah was still asleep upstairs. The house was quiet, but my mind was not. Every document, every phone call, every strange detail from the past week kept circling through my thoughts. Shortly after 9 o'clock, my cell phone rang again. Another unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. "Hello." There was a brief pause. "Mrs. Dawson?" a man asked. His voice sounded professional and cautious. "Yes." My name is Robert Keller. I am an attorney. I have been attempting to reach Ethan Dawson regarding several urgent matters. My grip tightened around the phone. Ethan is currently out of town. Silence followed. Then the attorney sighed softly. I was afraid of that. Something in his tone immediately caught my attention. Is there a problem? I asked. I cannot discuss everything without speaking directly to my client, he replied carefully. However, I can confirm that multiple deadlines are approaching. I looked toward the staircase. What kind of deadlines? Another pause. Financial deadlines. He chose each word with obvious care. Several arrangements have not been completed. Time is becoming a factor. My heart sank. Does this involve their home? I asked quietly. The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. Mrs. Dawson, has your son contacted you recently? That was not an answer. It was a question designed to avoid giving one. No, I admitted. Not since they left. I see. His voice became gentler. If you hear from him, please encourage him to contact my office immediately. Then he ended the call. I stood motionless in the kitchen. He had not confirmed my fears. But he had not denied them either. A few minutes later, Noah came downstairs wearing his favorite baseball shirt. He immediately noticed my expression. What happened? He asked. I forced a smile. Nothing you need to worry about. He looked unconvinced. Children always know when adults are hiding something. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Around lunchtime, Noah asked if we could visit the local library. I agreed. The outing seemed to help both of us. For an hour we wandered through shelves filled with books while pretending life was normal. But on the drive home, Noah suddenly spoke from the back seat. Grandma. Yes. Do you think people can love you and still leave? The question hit me harder than he probably realized. I kept my eyes on the road. Sometimes people make mistakes, I said carefully. Sometimes they become scared and make poor decisions. Even parents? He asked. I glanced at him through the rearview mirror. His face was serious. Far too serious for an 8-year-old. Even parents, I answered. He looked out the window and said nothing more. That evening, while Noah watched television, I sat at the dining room table reviewing the documents again. This time I noticed a detail buried near the bottom of one statement. A reference to an educational savings account. Noah's educational savings account. My stomach tightened immediately. I searched through the remaining papers until I found additional records. Then I saw it. Withdrawal after withdrawal. Large amounts removed over many months. I stared at the numbers in disbelief. This was not an accidental oversight. Someone had systematically drained money that had been set aside for Noah's future. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. The realization hurt more than the debt itself. Financial mistakes can happen. Businesses fail. Circumstances change. But touching money intended for a child felt different. It crossed a line I never imagined Ethan would approach. My son had not been raised that way. At least, I thought he had not. Later that night, Noah fell asleep on the couch while watching a movie. I covered him with a blanket and gently turned off the television. As I bent down to move a pillow beneath his head, a folded photograph slipped from his pocket. I carefully picked it up. The picture showed Noah standing between his parents during a beach vacation from several years earlier. All three were smiling. Across the back, written in Vanessa's handwriting, were the words, "No matter what happens, we will always be together." I stared at the sentence for a long time. Then I looked at the sleeping child curled beneath the blanket. For days, I had been searching for answers about money, debt, and hidden plans. But sitting there in the dim light of my living room, another possibility entered my mind. What if Noah's greatest fear was not losing a house? What if his greatest fear was losing his family? And for the first time, I began to suspect that whatever Ethan and Vanessa had planned, they had not told their son the whole truth. The next day, I decided I could no longer sit and wait for answers to arrive on their own. Noah deserved better than uncertainty. He deserved honesty, stability, and adults willing to face difficult truths. After breakfast, I called the attorney whose voicemail I had saved. To my surprise, he answered immediately. "Mr. Keller speaking. This is Margaret Dawson," I said. "Ethan's mother." A brief silence followed. Then his voice softened. "Mrs. Dawson, I know you cannot share everything," I said carefully, "but I need to understand whether my grandson is at risk of losing his home." He remained quiet for several seconds. "I can only speak in general terms," he finally replied. "But the financial situation is serious." Serious. The word landed heavily. Has my son been cooperating? I asked. Another pause. Not recently. After the call ended, I sat alone at the dining room table. The answer was limited, but it confirmed what I already suspected. Whatever Ethan and Vanessa were facing, they had stopped dealing with it directly. That afternoon, Noah and I worked on a model airplane kit I had purchased years earlier. We spread the pieces across the kitchen table. For a while, everything felt normal. Then Noah picked up one of the instruction sheets and stared at it. Grandma. Yes. Do you think people can run out of chances? I looked at him carefully. Why would you ask that? He shrugged. Dad used to say he just needed one more chance. Then he would say it again later. My heart sank. Children remember far more than adults realize. Everybody makes mistakes, I said gently. But eventually people have to stop making excuses and start fixing things. Noah nodded slowly. That is what Mom used to say. The words stayed with me long after the conversation ended. That evening, while Noah showered upstairs, my cell phone buzzed with a text message. For the first time in days, it was from Ethan. My pulse quickened as I opened it. The message was short. Too short. Hope everything is going well. We might extend the trip a few days. No, okay. I stared at the screen in disbelief. No explanation. No phone call. No concern about the growing pile of legal notices. Just a casual message as though nothing unusual was happening. I typed a reply immediately. Noah is safe. We need to talk. Call me. Several hours passed. No response came. The following morning brought another surprise. Linda stopped by again, this time carrying a small cardboard box. I found this by accident, she said. It was delivered to my porch yesterday. The label had Ethan's name on it. I thanked her and placed the box on the kitchen counter. It was lightweight. Inside were old family photographs, school papers, and several framed pictures of Noah from when he was younger. I felt a chill move through me. These were not random belongings. These were personal keepsakes. The kind people packed away when preparing to leave a chapter of their lives behind. That afternoon, after Noah went outside to ride his bicycle, I carefully sorted through the contents. At the bottom of the box sat a folder. Inside was a storage facility contract, the same facility referenced in the financial documents. I read every page slowly. Ethan and Vanessa had rented the unit nearly 6 months earlier. 6 months. This had not been a sudden crisis. It had been a plan unfolding quietly over time. Suddenly, dozens of confusing details began connecting together. The furniture pickups, the visitors touring the house, the drained accounts, the hidden paperwork, even the strange conversation Noah overheard before the trip. They had been preparing for something significant long before they boarded that ship. As evening approached, Noah returned inside and sat beside me on the porch swing. The summer sun was beginning to set. Orange light stretched across the yard. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then he leaned gently against my shoulder. Grandma. Yes, sweetheart. If somebody lies because they are scared, does that make them a bad person? I wrapped an arm around him. Not necessarily. Then why do lies hurt so much? I looked out across the yard and felt my heart ache for him. Because the people who love us are supposed to be the ones we can trust. Noah nodded quietly. Neither of us said anything else. But as the sun disappeared below the horizon, I found myself thinking less about money and more about intentions. The evidence was no longer pointing towards simple financial trouble. It was pointing toward preparation. And for the first time, I began to fear that Ethan and Vanessa had not merely left problems behind. They had been preparing to leave something else behind as well. The following morning, I made a decision. Waiting for answers was no longer enough. If Ethan and Vanessa had created a situation that threatened Noah's stability, then my responsibility was clear. I needed to prepare for whatever came next. After dropping Noah off at a summer reading program at the local library, I scheduled a meeting with an attorney of my own. Her name was Susan Whitaker, a family law attorney who had helped several people in our community through difficult situations. I arrived carrying a folder filled with documents, notes, and copies of every voicemail I had saved. Susan listened carefully as I explained everything from the beginning. She never interrupted. When I finished, she folded her hands and looked directly at me. Margaret, based on what you have shown me, there are reasons for concern. The words were calm, but they carried weight. What should I do? I asked. Right now, document everything, she replied. Every phone call, every message, every financial notice. Most importantly, focus on Noah's well-being. I nodded. That had already become my priority. Before leaving, I asked the question I had been afraid to voice. If parents make decisions that place a child in an unstable situation, what happens? Susan chose her words carefully. Courts care about the best interests of the child. It was not a complete answer, but it was enough. Driving home, I felt something I had not felt in days. Clarity. I could not control Ethan's choices. I could not undo Vanessa's decisions. But I could make sure Noah had someone willing to protect him. When I returned home, I found him sitting on the front steps waiting for me. He smiled the moment he saw my car. That simple smile reminded me why all of this mattered. Over the next few days, something began to change. Noah laughed more. He slept through the night. The dark circles beneath his eyes slowly faded. Without constant uncertainty surrounding him, he started acting like a child again. We visited the county fair. We ate ice cream. We spent evenings playing card games at the kitchen table. Yet even as life seemed calmer on the surface, new information continued arriving. Additional notices appeared in the mail. Another message came from an attorney's office. A final warning from a lender was delivered electronically to an account referenced in the documents. Each piece reinforced the same conclusion. The financial situation was reaching a breaking point. Then, on the 8th day, I finally received a phone call from Ethan. His number appeared on my screen while Noah and I were eating dinner. My heart immediately began pounding. I answered. Ethan. Hi, Mom. His voice sounded strangely cheerful. Too cheerful. How is Noah? I looked across the table at my grandson. He is doing well. A brief silence followed. Good, Ethan said. That is good. I waited. He said nothing else. No questions about the notices. No mention of the attorneys. No explanation for the growing mountain of evidence sitting inside my dining room folder. Finally, I spoke. Ethan, we need to have a serious conversation. Another silence. Longer this time. Mom, can it wait until we get back? No, I replied quietly. I do not think it can. His breathing changed slightly. For the first time, the confident tone disappeared. What do you know? He asked. There it was. Not confusion. Not surprise. Fear. I stared out the kitchen window as the evening sun faded across the yard. More than you think. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then he sighed. It sounded exhausted. Defeated. We will be home in 2 days. Good, I said. Because Noah deserves the truth. After the call ended, I sat quietly for a long time. Across from me, Noah watched my face carefully. He did not ask questions. He already knew enough to understand that something important had happened. That night, after he went to bed, I walked through my quiet house and checked the locks on the doors as I always did. Then I paused beside the guest room. Noah was asleep, hugging the old stuffed baseball bear I had given him earlier in the week. For the first time since his parents left, he looked completely at peace. As I stood there, I realized something important. I was no longer afraid of what Ethan and Vanessa might reveal when they returned. The truth had already begun revealing itself. And in 48 hours, every hidden decision, every secret plan, and every unanswered question would finally have to face the light. 2 days later, I stood at the front window and watched a taxi pull into my driveway. The afternoon sun reflected off the windshield as the vehicle came to a stop. Noah was sitting beside me on the couch, pretending to read a comic book. The moment he saw the taxi, his hands froze. Neither of us said a word. Ethan stepped out first. Vanessa followed a few seconds later. They looked tired. Not vacation tired. Worn down. Anxious. Like people carrying burdens they could no longer hide. I opened the front door before they reached the porch. Mom, Ethan said. We need to talk. Yes, I replied calmly. We do. Noah remained inside, standing quietly near the living room doorway. His parents smiled when they saw him, but the smiles faded when they realized he was not running toward them. He simply stood there watching. We sat around the dining room table a few minutes later. The same table where I had spent days sorting documents and piecing together the truth. Ethan looked at me, then at the folder resting beside my hand. His face changed immediately. He knew. How much do you know? He asked softly. Enough. The room fell silent. Vanessa stared at the tabletop. Ethan rubbed his forehead. Finally, I opened the folder and slid several documents across the table. Mortgage notices, financial statements, attorney messages, storage contracts, the educational account records. Neither of them looked surprised. They only looked defeated. How long? I asked. Ethan closed his eyes. Almost 3 years. The answer hit harder than I expected. 3 years of hiding. 3 years of pretending everything was fine. 3 years of carefully staged photographs and reassuring words. Why? I asked quietly. Vanessa finally spoke. It started with business investments, then credit cards, then loans. Every time we thought we could fix it. Her voice broke, but it kept getting worse. Ethan nodded. We were embarrassed. Embarrassed. I repeated. You drained Noah's educational account. Neither of them spoke. You let attorneys call your house. You moved belongings into storage. You hid documents from your own son. Ethan lowered his head. I know. The silence that followed felt heavy. Not angry, just sad. Deeply sad. Then Noah spoke. His small voice filled the room. Were you going to leave? Both parents looked at him immediately. The question seemed to hurt more than anything I had said. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. No, sweetheart. Noah did not look convinced. Then why did you keep saying goodbye like you were leaving forever? Nobody answered. Because they could not. Children often see truths adults try desperately to hide. Ethan slowly turned toward his son. We made mistakes. Noah stared at him. You lied. The simplicity of the statement seemed to break something inside both parents. Ethan nodded. Yes, we did. For the first time since their return, complete honesty entered the room. Over the next hour, the full story emerged. They had not planned to abandon Noah, but they had been desperately trying to escape consequences long enough to find a solution. They believed one final business deal would save everything. When it failed, panic took over. The cruise had been purchased months earlier during better financial times, and they convinced themselves that taking the trip would give them time to think, time to figure things out, time to postpone reality. Instead, reality had continued moving without them. When they finished explaining, I looked at my son for a long moment. You were so busy trying to save your pride that you forgot to protect your family. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. He nodded. There was nothing else he could do. Then something unexpected happened. Noah stood up from his chair. Everyone looked at him. I want to stay with Grandma for a while. The room became perfectly still. Ethan looked devastated. Vanessa began crying quietly, but neither argued, because both understood why. During the previous 10 days, Noah had found something he had been missing for a long time. Stability, honesty, peace. Several weeks later, attorneys, financial advisors, and family meetings helped begin the long process of rebuilding what had been damaged. The road ahead would not be easy, yet for the first time, it was built on truth instead of fear. Ethan and Vanessa started facing their obligations directly. Noah continued spending much of his time with me while life slowly settled into a healthier rhythm. One evening, months later, Noah and I sat together on the porch swing watching the sunset. Grandma, he asked. Yes. He smiled. Home really is where people stay. I smiled back and squeezed his hand. After everything that had happened, I finally understood that the greatest inheritance we leave our families is not money, property, or success. It is trust. And once trust is rebuilt with honesty, even the most broken family can begin finding its way home again.